And good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this latest edition of FSWC's Book Talk series. I'm thrilled to have with us here this evening Holocaust survivor Karmela Waldman and her son Joel, who are joining us live from Miami, where they live. I had the pleasure of meeting both Joel and his mother Karmela several months back when they came to Toronto in connection with Joel's then just released nonfiction book titled Surviving the Survivor, which we're going to talk about, of course, in a few minutes. Later in the program, we're also going to give away free copies of the book for 4 lucky members of the audience. And we also hope to have time, of course, as Elise mentioned, to take some questions from the audience for Karmela and Joel. The day before their presentation in Toronto at the Toronto Holocaust Museum, I met with Karmela and Joel at their hotel on a Sunday afternoon as I was there to interview them for an article I was writing about them and the book for the Times of Israel. To give you a sense of the book, Joel chose for its subtitle the following, and I quote, "A brutally honest conversation about life and death with my mom, a Holocaust survivor, therapist, and my podcast co-host." Before I begin our Q&A with Karmela and Joel, I'm going to read a brief bio for each of them. And I'll start with Karmela. A retired licensed marriage therapist, Karmela speaks 6 languages. Born in 1939, she was only 2 years old when the Nazis marched into her hometown of Subotica in the former Yugoslavia, now Serbia. In June 1944, Nazi SS officers came to her family's home and abducted her father. She escaped through the back garden with her mother, owing her survival to several non-Jews, including a nun who hid her in a Catholic boys' school. Her father and grandfather both perished at Auschwitz, and an aunt, uncle, nephews, nieces, and cousins also were murdered by the Nazis. Karmela later graduated from the University of Geneva in Switzerland, where she met her future husband, Roy Waldman, a medical student, and they eventually settled in the US, where they raised a family. For his part, Joel was spared a harrowing childhood such as his mother experienced. Born and raised in New Jersey, he earned a degree in English literature from Brandeis University and a master's degree in education from Bank Street College in New York. He then spent 27 years as an Emmy award-winning cable news correspondent, covering national politics based in Washington, D.C., and as a reporter in New York, Miami, and Tucson. In 2020, while living in Los Angeles, Joel dabbled in stand-up comedy, taking classes, after which he performed at the Hollywood Improv. In 2021, at the height of the COVID pandemic, Joel and Karmela launched their podcast, also titled Surviving the Survivor. It attracted a large audience, especially when it pivoted to focus on true crime. People were fascinated that it featured one of the oldest podcast co-hosts in the US, a Holocaust survivor no less, brimming with character. We'll get to the podcast shortly, but first let's start with the book. And having read the book, I can tell you it's an engaging read, at times extremely serious, even sad, and in other parts, humorous, even entertaining. Joel, I want to start with you by asking what actually prompted you to write the book, and if you could, just describe it briefly for our audience.
The answer to your first question, and first of all, thank you so much for having us, Robert and Elise, with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. It's a real honor to be here along with my mother. The short answer is kind of an embarrassing one, but Carol Baskin of Tiger King fame, prior to pivoting to true crime with our podcast, we were just interviewing random people. And we've got this great producer on our team named Steve Cohen, who I worked with. And Tiger King was a huge hit. And so Carol Baskin, if you remember her, she came on the show. The entire time, Karmela was referring to it as the Lion King, and she was polite and tried not to embarrass her. But she said something that just kind of caught my ear, which is, your mother is like my beloved tiger. She's an endangered species. And said she's not going to be here very long. Obviously, I hope that is not true, and my mom's in fantastic shape and still bossing me around and telling me what to do. But my dad recently passed, and his whole life as a child of the Great Depression, he was always talking about his money worries. But later in life, probably with 10 years to go, he said he was much more worried about time. And I know while time is really sort of difficult to figure out and wrap your mind around it, I knew instinctively that I had to tell this story. And so I literally just went and started writing. And the truth is, never rewrote, never wrote a second version. I just wrote it and handed it into my publisher in New York.
Joel, could you just describe briefly what it consists of?
Sure. So the book is unusual, to say the least, especially for a Holocaust story. It's like 15% my mom's story, or maybe 20%, and 80 or 85% my mom screaming at me, yelling at me, giving me life advice, dropping F-bombs. So if you don't like curses or expletives, probably not the book for you. The Audible version is completely clean because Carm denied having ever said any of these curse words, but I had obviously recorded the entire thing, so I had it on audio. So when we were in the Audible booth, we were arguing. She said, "I'm not saying the F word." I said, "You're saying it," and then she'd come up with another word. But the book is really just her life advice to her son. Very similar, if you remember Tuesdays with Maury, kind of akin to that book. And Mitch Albom was kind enough, along with a couple other big names, to give me a blurb for the book. And the rest, as they say, is history. But I think it's obviously a very important time for this book. And I tell everyone it's the most important story I've ever reported on. And it's uplifting. It's not a depressing book. It's funny, like Robert said, at times, sad at other times. But it will definitely change how you look at life. I can guarantee that.
Carmela, how do you feel about the book, especially given that so much of it does focus on your life?
I was very grateful to Joel that he wrote the book. I am still, not in the past tense. Um, just let me say a word. It's an honor to be at the Wiesenthal Center and speaking to you. And I was very happy that he did this because I cannot write, and I always had this feeling that I would like to say certain things, and I never thought it would happen. And then he just kind of sat down during a period of 5 months. He interviewed me on his phone. He would come up to my condo and interview me. And this was in a difficult period when my husband was very sick, and then he had to be in a care center. And during this period, he was feverishly writing. We were both visiting my husband, and then I was worried that he's a perfectionist, and he would try. I felt it was very raw and very real, and I was afraid that he would kind of, as I said in one moment, that he would neuter it, that he would like make it nicey nice, and it would all disappear. But he left it, and the publisher also left it as is, and it was never ever edited. Even it is what you see, it what happened initially. So I am glad that some of those things are on paper, and I hope that it will be of help to some people.
Well, as you just alluded to, Carmela, and Joel as well, that kind of unedited or unfiltered. And for those of our audience who have not yet read the book, it does contain many passages where your language, especially your use of four-letter words,
Mea
does
culpa.
does indeed seem uncensored. Likewise, you don't seem to hold back in your criticism of Joel in the book. Do you have any regrets about including those things in the book?
Please say yes. Please have one regret in life, Carm. At least one regret, Carm.
I um, I was quoting this thought from this famous existential writer. I'm not an intellectual, but I heard this: don't have hope and don't have regrets, and you will have a happy life. And so I truly, I know how much I love him, and I know that it came across in the book. So when I was trying to raise him, in quotation marks, and I was trying to still educate him as an adult, I did not feel any guilt. I feel very little guilt. Sometimes he says I'm just one step away from a psychopath because I don't feel that much guilt. And I, in my own mind, everything I did it out of love, and everything I do, and the way I relate to him and his wonderful wife and his children and my daughter and her children and husband, I do it out of love. I'm very grateful and very loving. So if I use some words and some harsh remarks, he deserved it.
Yeah. By the way, trust me, it is magnified by like a multiple of I don't know how much when we're off camera. It's actually a lot worse. People think it's shtick. It is not shtick. We like to argue and bicker, but it's all.
But I also said, interestingly,
She's the first. We took bets on who would cut off who first. Go ahead, Carm.
okay, I was first tonight. Um, I felt that this cursing, you can ask my daughter. I never ever curse with my daughter ever.
That's
With
true.
her 5 daughters, is it true?
Yeah, but she's also a little more religious, and you're more mindful of that with her. And she's never
No,
herself
no.
has cursed in her
This
life.
is. I said to
This
somebody
is
once, this is like our Esperanto. This is our private language.
yeah. Carm's trying to evade the fact that she. If I could get my 5-year-old son up, he just heard it yesterday. We're in the car, and she started dropping F bombs. I said, "My 5-year-old son's in the car," and he started parroting her. And Carm, you were humiliated for a quick moment, but
For a very short moment, then I overcame it.
yes, yes.
Joel, as you know, some of the criticism from your mom in the book is quite harsh. Do you ever take any offense at that criticism? Also in real life, I'm sure Karmela doesn't hold back. And did you have any hesitation about including that in the book?
Um, Short answer is absolutely not. I wanted to tell the unadulterated truth. I was kind of just thinking about something with baseball analogies. I'm kind of like the she treats me like I'm like the coach's son on the team. Like she's extra hard on me because she wants me to be the best. Coupled with my son is now playing t-ball. He is 5 years old, and I went to his. I go to all his t-ball games, but yesterday I was there, and there's a guy named Jose Iglesias, and Jose Iglesias plays currently for the New York Mets, and he's one of their hottest hitters and best players. And his son plays with my son, and it's funny because he hadn't been to a game at all, and his son's name is Alvaro, and Alvaro's a really cute kid, and I always talk to Alvaro, and Alvaro could not care less. He does not understand why anyone cares that his dad is a New York Met. He's 6 years old, not a big deal. And I make that comparison or analogy because growing up, I knew I was the son of a Holocaust survivor, but it just wasn't a very big deal. It was never mentioned in my home. My mom tried not to discuss it. My mom tried to just raise us as quote unquote normally as possible. But, when you're the major league player's son or the Holocaust survivor's son, there's a certain kind of responsibility or pressure that comes with it. You want to perform better and let people know. And so, as a journalist, I just felt it was really important to share her story. I don't know how effectively I did it, but I tried to capture the truth. And it's much more than, again, it's much more than a Holocaust story. It's a mother-son relationship, and it's just about all of us kind of going through things in life during the writing of this book. And then I'll shut up. We talk about the Holocaust, but my mother also lost a son who was a couple years older than me when he was just a few years old. And in the process of writing this book, my dad was put into a nursing home where he ultimately passed away. So it was really heavy. She was married 63 years, and we still argue. I say it was my dad. She says it was my husband, about who's more pained at his loss. But hope I answered that question.
Joel, what was the biggest challenge actually in writing the book?
I think the biggest challenge for me was just personally, if I was doing my mom's story justice. I don't know. There is, one of the things, and I don't want to get all like self, like aggrandizing, I guess. But, when I was writing it, I just wanted to make sure that I was being as accurate and kind of truthful and capturing my mother's essence really in the best way that I possibly could. And sometimes I was sort of questioned whether I was doing it effectively or not, but I was just, telling the truth. And if you tell the truth, I think everything else falls into place. There was one other thing that was just on the tip of my tongue, which failed me, but it'll come back to me. But that was really the hardest part, just making sure I was conveying the message that I wanted to convey. And it's gotten really, really, really good feedback. If you go to Amazon, you'll see it has like 4.9 stars. And I think it's because there's such an inauthenticity in our world. We see it with politicians. I'm not going to name names. We see it with people on TV and celebrities. And I just tried to be authentic and show the bad side, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I hope I did that.
And you have to admit one thing, if you want to admit, that we are very open with each other and we are very honest with each other. And you tell me, Joel is the only one who calls me on my BS.
Yeah. And by the way, the thing that I remembered that I wanted to say is, for some reason, I don't know why, I don't need other people's approval. I was at Fox News Channel. I used to get hate emails. I hate your tie. I have a podcast. People hate your delivery. I hate this. For some reason, it was very important to me, and still is, to have the adulation of my mom, the understanding that she approves. I guess it's, again, the little league analogy here. There was no other person, not my father, not my sister, no offense to my wife, not my wife, but if I felt like I was doing something half-assed or not effective, it would really bother me because of the way it might reflect on how my mother views me, if that makes any sense. And I think that's part of one of the things, before you cut me off real quick, is both my dad was a psychiatrist and my mother is a licensed therapist. So they went the other way. They were like, oh, it's all, a lot of BS. My dad used to say, I'm selling hot air for a living. He's not here, so I can reveal that now. But I do think that is a lot of generational trauma. Karma is incredibly not paranoid, like UFOs are coming or the government's. She's just very self-aware. I was on TV. She loves the attention, but she always likes to also be low key. There's an undercurrent of the Nazis are coming, is what I'm getting at, and I never had that. And my mom lives her entire life that way, and I think that is elements of that are through osmosis handed down to the kids.
Does that come through at all in the book, Joel?
Carm, you answer that, does it?
I would have to reread the book to answer this question, to what degree it comes across. But definitely, I'm paranoid. There is no question. Not paranoid to the point where I think it's a mild paranoia that's always there, and darn it, it's justified. I mean, I knew the Nazis are coming, and they just came.
Yeah.
Uh,
For my mom,
so
not
this reinforces but I'm okay. Basically, what doesn't come out through this conversation that I'm a very positive, happy person.
she is. Something I think Robert's going to get to. I'm just going to mention it. During the editing process, there was an editor who went through it. There were very few changes made, but during the editing process is when October 7th happened. And, my mom is a Zionist. She moved us to Israel. I lived there for 3 years. My dad had a hard time making a living there as a doctor. So ultimately we moved back, but it is not, the head of the IDF or Netanyahu that is running the state of Israel. It is my mother from her living room in Miami Beach. She's constantly monitoring the war, constantly making decisions, and is obviously, look, the state of the world right now is really frightening. I mean, really, probably as scary as I ever remember it being, and that's with growing up with the TV show or the movie The Day After about nuclear holocaust. But the world is a very scary place. So maybe my mom is right that the Nazis come in different forms, and she's always alert to that.
Carmela, what is your hope for what people will take away from this book? What do you think they will gain actually from learning about your life?
Well, we just told the story, but I think one of the things that, as a therapist, I have a master's degree in social work and additional coursework and so forth, and I did therapy, quote, counseling with people, and I think, in spite of the world being a tough place, I'm a very hopeful person, a very when I think of situations, I think that they will have a good outcome. I don't think that they will end up in a disaster. And that's what people can get out of it, that no matter how many unfortunate breaks I had, like lost a child, lost my husband, lost my father and my grandfather and my family during the Holocaust and so forth, I led a very I led a very happy life. In between the raindrops, I led a very happy life.
Um,
And
yeah, I want to jump in there, Carm, and cut you off for a change.
oh,
But
be
pardon
my
my French, but I really do think my mom is, and this I guess maybe a lot of sons would say this, but my mom is like an American badass and maybe Canadian too. Um, she's the source of really all of my strength. My dad was great, great guy. Loved them to pieces, but he wasn't a figure cut from the same cloth as my mom. My mom is the toughest person I know, the strongest person I know, the most opinionated person I know, the most optimistic person I know, the toughest person on me. But also, she commands like a presence. Since I was a little kid, everyone loved my mom. Every time she walks into a room, people flock to her. And it's this book is about all sorts of things, but
it's
I
about
pray
a
my
life.
mom's I pray my mom's here for 120 years, but I tell her I really don't know when she's no longer here how I can continue, but I know that that strength um, will be, translated into my physical being for the future. But she is literally, and I guess people call me a mama's boy, but she's the source of everything I do. I mean, I should not have achieved what I achieved. And now that I've achieved certain things, I don't feel like I've achieved enough. So it's turning into a therapy session. But I think that, these are all, it's like collateral damage from having a really powerful mother
Wait a minute.
as your, as at a Holocaust survivor. I'm going to tell you one super quick story, then Carm can jump back in. I remember we visited Israel when I was like 12 or 13 or 14 or 15, I forget. And there was this Hasidic, ultra Orthodox guy on a bus in Jerusalem. And because of, I guess, Shomer Negia, where you're not allowed to touch a woman, there was a pregnant woman on the bus. And this guy refused to move for the pregnant woman or did something rude. And my mom without missing a beat, just went up to this guy. My mom speaks 6 languages, but she speaks Hebrew, and told him he was going to hell. And this guy was speechless, and eventually sat down. I don't know why I remember that story. There's a lot of other stories like this, but it was just like a moment in time. I don't even think I mentioned that in the book, but it's, she's tough and she's a badass, and she takes absolutely no what from anybody. I mean, nobody. So,
But wait one
so
second.
watch out.
Wait 1 second. Didn't you give me recently a T-shirt that said mediocrities?
I didn't say about your work ethic, Carm. I talk about your personality. Carm is, she called me the perfectionist. She's the imperfectionist. I did get her a shirt that says, it's got the sculpture of Socrates, and it says mediocrities for her.
And I wear it proudly.
Yes.
I want to leave the book for a moment and turn to your podcast, and which is also shares the same title, of course, Surviving the Survivor. Before I ask you about it, I want to remind our audience, we really encourage anyone who has a question for Karmela and Joel. We will be getting to the questions later, so please use the chat box to enter any questions you may have for them. Before we actually start talking about the podcast, which is actually probably your biggest claim to fame, even more than the book, I want to share with our audience a very brief video, which is actually from the early days of the podcast, before the focus shifted to true crime. And the clip we're about to show you is from a few years ago, and it consists of the introduction, mostly by Joel, but also with Karmela, before they brought a guest on for an interview. So, Elise, if you would just cue up that video, please, because I think our audience will find this interesting.
Now I'm scared. Thank God there's no audio.
Well, the audio, I'm sure, will come in. Can we get the audio?
It might be better without audio.
No. Elise,
Elise is working on it. I think the body language says it all.
Joel, we made a huge mistake. We should have picked the audio.
I like those sunglasses.
Maybe
we can taken control here, because it will be embarrassing.
I want to hear this. I don't remember this. Elise, you got to get the audio.
The audio is not working?
No, it's not.
Oh,
playing.
sorry. Now let me start over. My apologies.
Here we go, Carm.
Here we go.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. If you have a mind, you'll love our podcast.
It's so anticlimactic again. Put this part, when I said it will be anticlimactic, put this part in, whoever edits it.
And Karmela starting off the show with a little negativity. I'll tell you why it's going to be anticlimactic today. And it's because we live in a generation now, and I'm going to scold everyone from 82 in front of me on down. We have today on the show a living, breathing, walking piece of history. And he's 102 years old. He was the lead prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, which is where they brought to justice Nazi war criminals. He's 102, so he's not speaking in little sound bites, and he's not whizzing through things like we do on TikTok and Instagram. But if you're listening to this podcast and you turn it off, he's got no attention span like a fly because of Mark Zuckerberg and these other morons in the world, I admonish you. You better listen to this podcast out of all our podcasts. But before we get to the main schmooze with Ben Ferenz, who we already spoke to, which is why I can tell you that he did not speak in sound bites, I want to tell you about myself for a moment.
Oh, God, don't do that. I'm going to go.
I was so stressed last night. I'll tell you why. Karmela, had you ever heard of a capuchin monkey?
You know what? This is so stupid.
So last night,
your IQ gap.
so last night,
No, don't do this. Do not do this.
I'm telling them what I had.
You know what, Joel? You and I have to sit down and put down the perimeters of what is acceptable to me.
Karmela's got a lot of issues the last couple of days, but
I had to cover two monkeys named Gilligan and Bert, who are strapped onto the backs of two dogs, and they ride them dressed in jockey outfits around a track.
Aren't you embarrassed
Brown-
after what
at the
you know,
Broward
to
County
ask
Fair.
the editor to cut
At
it
the
out?
Broward
You know,
County-
we should stop with this today.
The reason I bring it up is these animal rights activists are as hard-nosed as prosecutors, and they were texting me last night, and it gave me a headache because I was like, I'm going to get yelled at by the station because at the end of my story, I spoke truth to power. The animal rights activist said that these monkeys are mistreated, and the owner of the monkeys said that they eat at the dining room table. And I put that in my tag, which is the end of the story. And I said, you know what? I shouldn't have said that because the animal rights activists are going to scream at me because I said the monkeys eat at the dining room table. And you know what? I didn't hear a word from anyone.
You want to know, very honestly,
We're going to be right
Joel,
back with
this shows an inferior intelligence that after a man like this, you had to use this story. You do me a favor, cover your tracks and don't tell this story.
We're going to be right back on the main schmooze with Ben Ferenz, FERENCZ. Google him. Listen, if you tune it out because you're bored because he does not speak in sound bites, shame on you. Right back with a living legend.
So that gives you just a little taste of the dynamic that you can see on the podcast of Joel and Karmela. Quite engaging, quite entertaining. And
Ferenz.
By the way, the new podcast is really not like we've evolved into true crime. We've got a real set now. We talk serious issues. We have fun with it still. But by the way, when on a sad note, when the building collapsed, if you all remember in Surfside, Florida, CBS News called me in. So they told me they needed me for 10 days, and I ended up there for a year and a half. And that was one of my final stories, was covering these little monkeys who are on the backs of dogs at a state fair, just to show you how ridiculous news is.
And I was
because I said that they eat at the dinner table, these animal rights activists were furious at me. So everything is in context. It made sense at the time. It makes no sense now. But the way Karmela reacted is the way she reacts to a lot of things, not just Capuchin monkeys.
Listen, I am not a perfectionist, but when you talk to the last surviving, what was the prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials, a very sad part of our history, and this guy was brilliant even at 102, and it was very meaningful. And then you bring up this idiotic story that has nothing to do with it. I could use very easily 4-letter words, but I'm afraid that Robert would be too shocked.
Yeah. By the way, Ben Ferenz passed at 103. I was at his house. He had a slogan, "Law, not war." When I was at his house, I think he was 102, and he was doing push-ups every day. Guy was absolutely amazing. And again, he was the youngest. It was his first case ever, was the Nuremberg trials. The youngest prosecutor, I think he was 27 at the time, but he was responsible for putting away these Nazi criminals. Maybe Carmen's got a point. Next time I interview
Very rarely do I have a bigger point.
Yes, next time I interview a Nuremberg trial prosecutor, I will not discuss Capuchin monkeys, Carmen. I make that promise.
Karmela, what was it like for you to become a podcast star at this stage in your life?
It was, I had this saying that every Wednesday, Joel would pick me up at 3:00 when my husband was napping and at home, because he was still at home until he needed a feeding tube. He was always home, and I took care of him there. And I would go at 3:00, he would take me to the recording studio, and I was always feeling like, I was let out of the nursing home, even though it's a nice condominium. But I felt very, very grateful for, he asked me if I want to do a podcast with him at the height of the COVID. And my husband encouraged us to do it because he knows us. He knew us.
Listen, make no mistake, Carm is the absolute star of the show, even though she's scaled back her work schedule. I am basically like the Larry King of true crime. We do a live show every night, and our tagline, as you see right behind me, is best guests in true crime. We really have, thanks to Steve Cohen, who's our booking producer. We bring on, who's also from TV news, bring on the best criminal defense attorneys, criminal profilers, prosecutors, retired detectives, retired FBI agents. I've become friends with the BTK serial killer's daughter as a result of this. I've become very good friends with Ruth Markel, who's in this Zoom, I believe. She's got a very sad story. Her son, Dan Markel, if you don't know the story, was much smarter than I will ever be. He went to Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Law School, and he turned down big salary positions, which you get after you graduate Harvard Law, and he went to teach at FSU, and he was a rising legal scholar when he was gunned down in his driveway more than 10 years ago. It was July of 2014, and 10 years later, just a year ago, the ex-son-in-law was convicted and sentenced to life in prison in Florida for the murder for hire plot to kill Dan Markel. And the matriarch, the nice Jewish mother, now 74, was supposed to just go on trial, and that fell apart because of a very long, convoluted story with her attorney who represented both of them. But I just wanted to acknowledge Ruth, who is here, and tell her how much we care about her. And she's written her own book about this called The Unveiling, and that is definitely worth a read as well. But they're
And she lives in Toronto.
Lives in Toronto, and listen, her and her daughter Shelley and Phil Markel are really it's difficult. You know, they're looking for justice, and so we've really gone away from a lot of the silly stuff. We have a lot of fun on the show. But we do, talk about current cases. This Thursday, I'm bringing Carm out of retirement. We're looking at the Menendez brothers. Lyle and Eric Menendez might be let out of prison very soon. And so we're talking about whether or not they are rehabilitated. What does that mean? And so Carm is coming on with an ex-prison warden and a former inmate. What an eclectic crew. Carm, the prison warden, and an inmate. And we will discuss that. So that's kind of what we're doing these days.
And your most recent episode, I believe, was actually as recent as last night. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we do a live show every day.
We don't do Shabbat. You forgot to mention
Not
that.
Shabbat, but we do every day. We've got a live show. I just did one today. There's a mother of 4 who went missing. People heard an argument between her and her husband. Husband is a prime suspect. He's arrested. This is sadly a frequent story here in America. Don't know why they don't get a divorce, but he's going to end up, I'm sure, being charged for her murder, but they are still looking for her.
What's the origin, Joel, of the podcast, and what actually prompted you to ask your mom to be your co-host for it?
Yeah, I was just depressing everyone, including myself. So I'm glad you got me out of that, Robert. So, I started at, it's interesting. I started as a producer at MSNBC in '95, and I ended up at Fox News Channel. Back then, both of them, well, Fox News Channel didn't even exist, but MSNBC was kind of like a news outlet, and now they've all shifted. That's a whole other story. But I met a lot of people through the years, producers, and there was, some big names who I could have asked to be a host. But Carm is, she's the star of the show. Everyone loves her. She's got the it factor, and she's got amazing, if you watch, you'll see, even at 85 now, really insightful comments, things that no one else thinks of. And she comes up with it, she's analyzing things in the moment. I don't give her questions or anything, and she does her own research, but she's really a skilled therapist, so she brings a lot to the table, and yeah, she's the star for sure.
Understandably.
Well, thank you, sir.
Carm, by the way, is also the first person in recorded history to have not written a book, but
It's
signed
true.
every copy of the book that has been signed.
That you didn't write.
Yes. Carm can be a little lazy, but I prop her up. And now she's 85, she uses the I'm tired and need a nap excuse, which I don't allow. So she's still going strong.
we live about 10 minutes from each other by car.
Well, we alluded a bit earlier in the program to October 7th. And I'd like to just follow up on that a little bit and ask you first, Karmela, also as someone who lived in Israel for several years, who obviously survived the Holocaust, and who still has family in Israel as a Holocaust survivor, specifically, what has it been like for you ever since you heard the horrific news on October 7th and to witness the aftermath since then? And this terrible surge in anti-Semitism and the demonization of Israel. What's it been like for you personally?
Right, this is a few questions. I'll try to be brief on every one of them. First of all, I don't just have any family in Israel. My daughter has 5 daughters, and 2 of those daughters made Aliyah, and one of those daughters was even in the Israeli army. And they are both married, and I call their husbands my honorary grandsons. And one of them now has a 1-year-old little boy, and the other one, God willing, will soon have a baby, God willing. And the 2 husbands just came back for about 8 days in Lebanon. They are in the parachutes, both husbands. And for 8 days, they had to hand in their phones, and we didn't know if they lived or died. During that week, about 10 Israeli soldiers died. So it doesn't have to go back historically to October 7th for me to have a very stressful period in my life, in my daughter's life, in my son's life, because Joel also gets upset, and the whole family. But when it happened on October 7th, everybody said, oh, this is another Holocaust. And I said, this is called a pogrom. And many people didn't even know what a pogrom was. And I'm not going to give a tutorial on pogroms, but it is, nothing is as horrendous as the Holocaust was, not for me personally, but for the Jewish people. And I couldn't understand how could Israel let this happen. That was the first thought I said, how could there be an oversight like that? And then I remembered that exactly to the day, 50 years before that, I just made Aliyah like the year before in 1972 with my husband. We came, and Joel and his sister, we came to Tel Aviv we tried to see if we can live in Israel, and the Yom Kippur War broke out. And the Yom Kippur War was also a big surprise because we are lulled into, maybe the country should be more paranoid like I am. We were lulled into this feeling that everything is okay and everything is going well. And then what happened, we all know the history of the Yom Kippur War, which was also a major, major catastrophe and could have been even a worse catastrophe. But again, it wasn't the Holocaust. And I tend to be an optimist. I think at this moment, today is the 29th of October, 2024. And I think that today, things look a drop better for my family because the boys came back now, and they are back on Israeli, in Israel territory. But also, I think, I'm apprehensive how Iran will respond to the latest events, but I am feeling safer knowing what happened in the last year and how we all survived it. So again, my optimism drives me towards the positive.
Excellent. Joel, you as a son of a Holocaust survivor, perhaps that's also had an impact on you as you've experienced the past year since October 7th. Maybe you could address how you've perceived things, how your feelings, your emotions about what's transpired on October 7th and since then.
Yeah. You know, to be totally transparent, I was always just so focused on my career and all these things. And, you know, sure, I knew a lot about Israel. I've been to Israel. I cared about Israel, but I was never really that invested, you know. And then October 7th happened, and it's just, I cannot believe what's going on. I don't think people realize necessarily the severity of what is happening right now, not just in Israel, but like geopolitically. If you look at what's going on in Europe, I try to read everything I can on this stuff and look at it. I mean, just today there was terror attack in Jerusalem, I believe. There was a shooting followed by a car ramming. And what the hardest thing for me is, I'm an empathetic person. And so, you know, you see these images. Well, let me take a half step back. I've got a good friend who I'm still good friends with, who's not Jewish, who happened to go to Brandeis with me, one of the few non-Jewish guys. And him and I have just been going back. You know, he's like, "This is a genocide." I'm like, "You're an idiot." Except people have really passionate views, and I'm an empathetic person. Like, no one wants to see babies killed on either side. You don't want to see what happened on October 7th. You don't want to see babies or women as collateral damage. But the truth is, and this is my opinion, and I hope people still watch the podcast after this, but my opinion is that Benjamin Netanyahu is now doing the world a huge favor. He is getting rid of a malignant cancer right now. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do for a number of reasons. You've got to go against basically public opinion and public support. You've got to go up against the United States, who's giving us aid. And it's what he is doing is next to the, in my opinion, impossible. But he is showing Israel's superiority on every level, and it's I'm kind of getting the chills now, but it's a hard thing to explain. And you know, this is my friend who's not Jewish. Unless you're born Jewish, become Jewish, have a tie to Israel, you don't realize how important that land is to the Jewish people, what it means to them. And it's a very difficult argument with all these images to make publicly in front of people who don't agree with you. But it's important now, obviously more than ever before, to be proud to be Jewish. I'm not overly religious, but I take my kids to a Chabad where they welcome me, and it's you know, they talk about how the Rebbe wanted people to be proud of Judaism. With that said, a guy was just shot in West Rogers Park, a Jewish suburb of Chicago, and reportedly the shooter yelled Allahu Akbar. Now the Chicago police are trying to say, no, that didn't happen. A guy in Brooklyn or Queens today was slashed in the face, a religious guy. It's ugly out there. People hate the Jews. People have always hated the Jews. My mother's told me people have always hated the Jews, and I never really believed her until now. And now you see how much they really do hate us. The one thing we've got over the rest of the world is our intelligence and our grit, and a very, very formidable military. And again, I think Netanyahu is doing justice for the entire free democratic world by removing these malignant cancers. And this guy who was just named the new head of Hamas, I hope he's terrified in bed, because I don't think he's going to be around very long. Anyway, sorry, I went a little overboard there.
Quite sobering stuff. Before we take a few questions from our audience, I do see there are a number of questions in the chat box. As promised, we have some copies of Surviving the Survivor to give away. And to do that, we have 4 questions, not the famous 4 questions in our heritage, but 4 questions actually that Joel submitted for the contest. And what we're going to do, we're going to read out each question, and the first person to answer correctly or most accurately will win a copy of Surviving the Survivor. We'll notify you to get your address so we can follow up later, eventually to send that book to you. So here we go. Question number 1. Approximately, how many Holocaust survivors are still living today in the world? Okay, so submit your best answer for that question. And again, the person who replies most accurately will receive a copy of the book. And I think Joel submitted questions that are related to the Holocaust, obviously, given that Karmela is a Holocaust survivor. So you'll see that all these questions are connected to the Holocaust. Question number 2. What was the name of the second largest Nazi concentration and extermination camp? And a bit later, I'll get to the answers. Now, as we all heard, and this is question number 3, Karmela was a child survivor of the Holocaust. Sadly, many children in that period did not survive the Holocaust. Question number 3, how many Jewish children did the Nazis murder during the Holocaust? Okay, and the final question, question number 4, which country liberated Auschwitz in January of 1945? Okay, so please submit your answers, and I will read out the answer in a moment. But maybe before I do that, let's get to a couple of questions. And here's a question from Jane Knuth, who asked, does Karm's training in therapy inform the examinations that she and Joel do of true crimes in the podcast?
That's correct. I am always giving the psychological angle of stories, analyzing the people's motivation, background, connection between their behavior and their upbringing, and I go into the psychological aspect, and I want to open just a very small parenthesis. We are very concerned with the victims of crime, and they are a special group of people who need support, the victims of crime.
Okay, excellent. Joel, anything you want to add to that before we get to the next question?
Other than my mom is incredibly insightful, I'll just give you a super quick example. I was just covering a murder trial in Orlando for the last 2 weeks. The woman's name was Sarah Boone. She was on trial for, if you can believe this, zippering her boyfriend into a suitcase and then leaving him there to die. I know this gets pretty morbid, but it's a fascinating case. She was dumb enough to film it. But this guy, you wonder, and it's, by the way, it's a 28-inch long suitcase, and you wonder how a grown man can fit in there. They both have issues with alcoholism, which, by the way, in America, I found out that's no longer an acceptable term. It's called alcohol misuse disorder or something along those lines, but that's neither here nor there. So just to give you an example, everyone's like, what's going on in this relationship? And she comes from kind of a disturbed background, obviously. And Karm right away said, look, it's a pathological relationship. She wanted a boyfriend, a lover, but she also wanted a child. She has a child, which she's not close with, but she wanted someone to basically boss around. And Carm said she literally picked, this guy was 5'1" and 103 pounds, which is how he was able to fit into this suitcase. And when you see these videos, there's other videos where she's just reprimanding him like a mother would reprimand a 5-year-old. Never crossed my mind. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but Carm saw it right away. Kind of a quick example of her insight. A lot of these stories, you know, they're just fascinating from many different points of view. Some people, it's just not their cup of tea. Like people don't like the Ultimate Fighting Championships or boxing. This is not everyone's cup of tea, but each of these stories has a really unique set of kind of story arcs and threads, you know, through them, psychological and criminal, etc., that are, in
You
my
know what?
opinion, very interesting to dissect. Go ahead, Carm.
No, but what you do and your podcast, which is fascinating, you take serious trial lawyers, respected trial lawyers. I could names drop, but I am not going to. And these people literally give tutorials on the legal aspects. So it's almost like you mentioned ultimate fighting. This is like ultimate fighting. It has its own rules, and we are now half lawyers already from listening to all these podcasts and learning from all these very knowledgeable people. On top of it, we have like people who were in prison for a long time, and they come out and they're rehabilitated, and we learn what's happening inside prisons. It's a fascinating area if you are into it.
Okay, well, I'll take another question now from Joanna Novis, who asks, how does the dynamic between Joel and Karmela change when Joel's sister is around? Does she get a word in edgewise?
No. The dynamic between Carm is I exhaust her and she exhausts me, and it never ends. It's a cycle of pure exhaustion. My sister, love her to death. My sister is 180 degrees different. I'm not sure how we're from the same parents. She's actually a lot more like my dad. My sister is the sweetest person, kindest person, well-meaning, well-intentioned, not one to lose her cool.
She happens to be a doctor.
She's rub it in, Carm. Rub it in.
I rub it in.
Not only is she a doctor, but
because the way we describe her, she could be an absolute dummy.
Yeah, by the way, this is the way this is why I have to get my mother's approval. My sister was valedictorian of her high school class. She was the perfect kid. She didn't just go to medical school. She went to BU 6-year med. So she was a doctor at like 21 or 22 years old. But she's a great person. And
she truly is a great person. She's truly a great person.
Hold on. Is she greater than me, Carm?
No, she's equally great as you.
We'll have a conversation about this after the show.
It's in the book. It's in the book.
She's a really unusual person because you don't meet someone that's like that generous and kind without an ulterior motive, and she doesn't really have ulterior motives. So
she's deprived of an ulterior motive.
Yeah, she's actually just trying to survive in a rough world. That was our tagline. You can see it behind my mom. We've gone through a few different taglines. We also had, I think, on the first podcast clip, or the only one that you showed, it was news, and I'm proud to say I came up with this. It was news, schmooze, and neurotic views. I came up with that. So that's still kind of who we are.
Yeah, I think we should start to use it again.
All right, there's time just for one last question. And I see actually my son, who I didn't know was tuning in, has posed a question. And he lives just outside of Washington, D.C. And this question is directed to you, Karmela. He asked, where do you find the strength to approach life with such positivity and resilience, given the horrors you've lived through? What has helped you to hold on to hope and joy in the years since the Holocaust?
Well, first of all, the Holocaust was a relatively short episode. And then things got even worse. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Uh, what give, don't you know we are a resilient people? Don't you know that haven't given in 2000 years? Why should we give in now? Now we have a lot more going for us. I just have to say one thing that I thought of in honor of my stepfather. Uh, my stepfather lost his first wife and his son during the Holocaust, and he married my mother. And he said to me once, he says, Carmela, you know what is the definition of anti-Semite? That somebody who hates the Jews more than the norm.
Mm.
So I was just thinking that I just read recently that in Toronto they actually there was somebody who shot at a school.
That's happened twice, actually, at the same
That's
school.
happened twice.
Twice?
I'm going to just, on my end, I just want to tell a very quick, funny story to kind of sum up
Yeah,
Carm
we
and
have a
I.
lot of fun, and this is not coming through in this.
So I have, she's worried it's not coming through. So my middle daughter's name is Zizi, Z-I-Z-I. And the reason I named her this, if you read the book, you'll find out my mother's first father,
My
her
real
biological
father, my
father,
genetic
was Ladislav. And then her mother remarried another Ladislav. And in English, forever, both of their nicknames were Lotzi. And forever, my mother on like notes when she would, I mean, I remember this from like 8th or 9th grade, she'd write Latzi. So I took Zizi, and then I have this daughter who's born, my middle child, and I tell them the name, and my mother's like, "What is this? What is ZZ?" And I was like, "Oh, I named him after your two fathers, your real father, your stepfather, because it's Latzi." And I took the ZI. She goes, "It is not a ZI, it's a CI." And suddenly she like changes it and like tries to shame me that I got it wrong, but it is still ZZ. It is not CC. And she used to spell it ZI, and that's the meaning of the name.
And
But
she's a terrific, you have to admit she's a terrific kid.
she is. All of them are.
Okay, just looking at the time here as it.
Carm, admit it. Do you love me more than my sister? Yes or no, Carm?
This is in the book, exactly this. He trying to force me to say yes. No, 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 no.
Okay, on a little more serious note here, I promised to read to give the answers to the 4 questions, and here we go. So you'll recall the first question was approximately how many Holocaust survivors are still alive today? And the number that Joel provided, I'm not sure where the source is, but the number listed here is 265,000 survivors. That's the global number.
Half of them live in Israel, by the way, from what I've seen.
And again, we'll eventually get to the answers, and whoever comes closest will win a copy of the book. The second question, what was the name of the second largest Nazi concentration and extermination camp? The answer to that is Majdanek, which is located near Lublin in Poland. Question 3 was, how many Jewish children did the Nazis murder during the Holocaust? And the number, the answer to that question is 1.5 million children. And lastly, question number 4, which country liberated Auschwitz in January of 1945? And it was the Soviet Union Red Army. Okay, so those are the answers to the 4 questions, which brings us to the close of this segment of SFWC's Book Talk series. I want to thank again everyone who tuned in and joined us for this evening, and with a special appreciation, of course, to Carmela and Joel for being our featured guest. For anyone interested in purchasing Surviving the Survivor, and I will show it again, and I do recommend it. I did enjoy reading it, very much so. If you're tuning in from Canada, it is available at the Indigo bookstore chain. If you can't get to the store, it's also available online. And our next segment in Book Talk will be next month, when we're going to host Toronto writer John Lorink to discuss his new book, which is titled No Jews Live Here, which focuses largely on what Jews endured in Hungary during the Holocaust. So we're looking forward to hosting John on Book Talk next month. Stay tuned for more details in the coming weeks on the date and time of that. And on behalf of friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, thank you again for being with us. Thank you so much, Karmela and Joel, for being here tonight.
Thank you for having
Robert,
me.
one last quick thing. The show would not exist without the COE. She is the chief of everything, otherwise known as my wife, Ileana, who I call Bugs. And without the COE, nothing happens. So it's the two women in my life, Carm and Bugs, the COE, the chief of everything. That makes it all work. Sorry to cut you off there at the end, but I would get in trouble if I went home without saying that.
All good. Thanks again to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It was
Well,
awesome. Thank you.
Good night
Bye.
to you all.